Lakeland PBS presents Common Ground, brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota. Production funding of Common Ground is made possible in part by First National Bank BEMIDJI, continuing their second century of service to the community, a partnership for generations. Member FDIC. Welcome to Common Ground. I'm producer-director Scott Knudsen. In this episode, visit the MacRostie Art Center in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, where artists Andrew Nordin, Natalia Himirska, and Jonathan Thunder share their experience exhibiting their art for the community.
I am Katie Marshall. I am the Executive Director at MacRostie Art Center, and we are located in downtown Grand Rapids. MacRostie is a community art center, and we're mostly focused on the visual arts. We have 2 gallery spaces. We do exhibitions in our galleries. We have an art shop where we sell work by local and regional artists, and we have studios where we teach classes for youth and adults.
My name is Kayla Aubid. I'm the Gallery Director at the MacRostie Art Center. We are an art center in northern Minnesota, here to inspire the creative community, welcome artists from Minnesota and beyond, and engage with our local arts community through the art shop and through arts education.
We have a pretty ambitious exhibition schedule at MacRostie. We do 24 exhibits every year because we have 2 exhibits each month in our galleries. But it's something that the community's really kind of come to expect and appreciate, is having that level of turnover and having, every month you come in, you see something new, and we really work hard when we put our exhibit schedule together to have a lot of variety of both artists in terms of where they're from, if they're local artists, familiar names, or new faces that we haven't seen before, people who are both emerging artists and more established in their careers, and then definitely a diversity of mediums.
That's pastel. Wow. This is pastel.
Oh, wow.
And that one.
Being the only visual arts center in Itasca County, we want to do our best to really give people a lot of opportunities to interact with the art world and be a part of the larger national conversation on visual art.
My role has kind of changed over the past couple months, I think. Previously, I just worked with the artist in the art shop, so primarily local artists. Now I've been working directly with the exhibiting artists to create their shows, curate their shows, and get their name out there in our area and beyond.
That took my life away with all those details, and I kind of wanted to make detailed and fresh. Yeah, a lot of mask and layering. And
well, I think one thing that's exciting for our exhibits program, to have artists from all over Minnesota come and visit us and have their exhibitions here, is that those artists who are exhibiting have the opportunity to visit our space and interact with our local arts community, and then vice versa. Our local artists can visit our space and get some inspiration or see what else people are doing outside of the state or in the state with their arts practice.
The exhibition program at MacRostie Art Center is one of our 3 main program areas, and it's been an important part of what we do ever since we began over 50 years ago. Having a gallery and a space to show artists' work is important for artist development, for supporting our local artists, but it's also an important way to engage the community in visual arts and sort of provide a window to lots of different people's view of the world.
Andrew Nordin's exhibition, Threshold, Paintings of Rural Decay, was a look at not only the landscape where Andrew comes from, but also the landscape that he's traveled when he visits the Iron Range. And it's kind of an abstract look at the things that maybe we just drive past and don't consider, like how the different colors of the houses or the different colors of the landscape change as we move across them.
Hi, my name is Andrew Nordin. I'm from New London, Minnesota. I'm here at the MacRostie Art Center exhibiting a new body of work titled Threshold. All of this work is inspired by my trips in rural countryside of Candy, Ohio County, where I come from, all the way up to the Iron Range, southeast Minnesota and other parts of Minnesota. This body of work was created for a Minnesota State Arts Board Artist Initiative grant for the 2017 year, and it comes from my deep interest in abstraction and solving problems in painting, dealing with new visual phenomenon and inspiration from rural landscape and architecture.
So Andrew Nordin, his subject matter is focused on rural architecture and particularly the decay of rural architecture. And so in his abstract paintings, he explores those ideas pushed to the threshold, to the point of almost being unrecognizable. His work is really part of the conversation about rural America.
So a lot of this work is based out of finding visions, finding compositions, finding interesting phenomenon in things like farm sheds, in perhaps more rundown or long life in rural areas. I spend a lot of time commuting, so I see these sheds and different things almost on a daily basis. One of the things I set out to do was to solve problems by having these things photographed. So I spent a lot of time photographing different architectural elements, so not just sides of sheds, but for instance, in this painting, it comes from an old wrought iron screen door, and just seeing that composition. And from there, I've made a body of work of about 6 paintings, and these are called Kandiyohi County Baroque. That's the county that I was born in and that I moved back to. And the title brings the notion of the Baroque period in art and this idea of over-ornamentation and a really almost loud presentation of visual phenomenon. So they weren't meant to be subtle works. But in this case, each painting has an internal logic, and with this painting, it really was the logic of the wrought iron that I was then tracing and looking at and editing and continuing to find resolution and a unity. So all of these paintings really have multiple layers. In this case, this became a whole subset of the paintings, was this geometry and this particular curve. Part of the reason was I was interested in this idea that especially in rural areas, we don't have a lot of symbols or architectural elements that really tell us where we are or that have a long history. We think of the countryside as being a place that has always been there, but when we think about the lifespan of, for example, my ancestors were all 19th century immigrants that started farming in that area. And they were the first people to start building these modern structures that were there on top of things that were perhaps there from indigenous people hundreds of years before that. But all of these things that we know from big cities, or if we look at the cultures that some of these people came from, there isn't a lot of evidence of these symbols. So I was just trying to mine and find something that I could latch on to that's not something I see every day. So a little bit, this reminds me of perhaps a fleur-de-lis symbol, and you can take from that whatever you want. The viewer can be reminded of almost anything from that particular symbol. I've been told that this painting, for example, has references to tile, that it really could go on infinitely. I think this painting really is a great example of the body of work, and it's one that maybe it's just one that's a favorite, or one that I find can be emblematic of the whole show. One of the things I'm trying to do with this exhibit too is to design and have the layout of the gallery lead you through different affinities that are happening within the painting. So even though there's different compositional elements in each painting, they all have perhaps a similar color palette, or a way that, for example, black is being used as a key color to sort of hold in the other colors. That's evident in the next painting to its left. It's also a good eye catcher for the window and having the great architecture of the MacRostie Gallery.
Additionally, he has also been looking into iconography, particularly through his ward images, kind of the idea that in the past, ancient cultures, maybe even like Northern European cultures, used these type of icons to keep away different, maybe like feelings or emotions or spirits even from their household. And the ward paintings are kind of a look back on those and how in contemporary society we can recognize a lot of that imagery, but it doesn't necessarily have the same impact or effect why we put it in our house today.
This painting right here is titled Kandiyohi County Baroque Evil Eye Ward. And what's interesting about this is it's one of the first paintings that I started in this series as I was trying to discover how I wanted to work with this new subject matter of looking at rural architecture and buildings. The title Evil Eye Ward comes from this notion about earlier cultures, whether it's Scandinavian culture or European culture. Many cultures through the world have notions about weaving, and that weaving can be a trap for the evil eye or for evil spirits. I found that idea really interesting in researching decoration and pattern, that there might be a function for painting like this in your home, that it would be good luck or that it would keep your house free from evil spirits.
Southwestern Minnesota is where a lot of his work is from, but he also, for this particular show, his paintings were mostly focused on the rural architecture of that area, which is a lot different from northern Minnesota, but he did incorporate a couple of pieces related to the Iron Range and some of the particular forms of rural decay that we see in this region. So it's interesting to kind of have that comparison to contrast the two parts of the same state of Minnesota.
Natalia Himirska is an artist. She currently works out of BEMIDJI. She's a professor at BEMIDJI State University. Her work has been shown internationally. So her work here at the gallery is entitled Variations. Her work is really a look at all the different styles that she creates. Rather than having a direct message, the work in the gallery space itself was, I think, a reflection of particularly the things that she's been doing this past year with her students at BSU. So she had everything from pastels and chalks to charcoals and encaustics and prints. It was really kind of the range of the work that she creates.
Hello, my name is Natalia Himirska, and I'm an artist and a teacher. I teach at BEMIDJI State University, painting, color theory, drawing foundations, art history sometimes included into my teaching. Here the works of different techniques are very important too, because each technique has its own character, I would say. Watercolor is, I keep comparing watercolor to a cat. Very difficult to catch a character. So it's like it can spread, it can dry, it can run, it can stay with a very sharp edge, but it behaves very differently from oils, for example. Oils are much easier to control. Oils require layering, glazing, which gives you a different appearance of the fine form. Pencil and marker and pen and ink, they all have their characteristic, and when you paint or draw, you kind of have duet with this material. Not only you make it work, but the material tells you what to do, what not to do. It requires a certain time. And for me, being a professor at BEMIDJI State, having done a lot of working on new curriculum, new ideas for students, I constantly had to change my materials, which definitely influenced my work. I took several workshops with encaustic. Encaustic is painting with wax. I recently took an alcohol workshop, which is painting with bright inks based on alcohol. Every time you change your technique, you have to change your approach to form and to what you do, but your idea stays the same. My idea of what I'm doing, it's a tight connection to time which put impression on every living organism, and in the time we all connect to the previous artist, to your ideas, to memories from your past. So this is one of the works which I call bookmark, and it contains my research on the techniques where a lot of texture involved. And at the same time, since I was painting with watercolor, I started to use oil painting like watercolor, and that combination of very rough texture with the softness of watercolor, with the line itself which can express a signature, and yet it can go and be very abstract, and then at some point to emphasize the form and then go away, creating this dance of lines and spots and materials, and after all creating an image which maybe speak to the viewer on some point. This is a work which shows the figurative approach, because a lot of my work mostly have no figures, at this exhibition particularly, have no human figures. Very few of them have. And I decided that just to show the whole spectrum of my abilities, it will be good to show the ability to create the human figure, face, portrait. And it's dear to me emotionally, because it's my friend from the past, and it goes together with the idea of me connecting to memories, friends, artists. And I think it's a beautiful work, and I like it. And so it's like one of the broad spectrum. The exhibition name is Variations, and my variations on the approaches that work, I think, represent very well with the technique inside, with the topic of bookmark, and with the rest of the other works, which are watercolors, oils, pastels, acrylics, and so on.
It was great to have Natalia here for exhibit. She did a wonderful artist talk, and she really talked a lot about not only her own process as an artist and how her teaching relates to her own practice. I think people are always interested in that dynamic when someone's a teaching artist as well as a working artist, how those two can play off of each other.
People, when they look at the painting, they very often absorbed by imagery. Very rarely people connected to the artist's hand. Everything which is created here is artist's hand. The signature is the hand, the dripping paint, the scraping hand, the little lines is my hand, the modeling of the form is my hand. All of this is the hand which moved by the mind, which want to connect all this beauty of material and colors and color schemes and contrasts and brevity and timidity of treating the material with the thought that it will, create a certain impulse or will speak to someone or intrigue it. And you really think about the viewer. You're not thinking what the viewer will perceive. This is the second life of the painting.
Jonathan Thunder is a painter who is currently living in the Duluth area, and his exhibit is part of a collection he put together called Peripheral Vignettes. And this particular show here at MacRostie is called New Heroes from the Old World. And it's a lot of character-based artwork that are, a lot of times the images in his paintings are characters that are part of a larger narrative or part of some kind of a story that takes place either in his own imagination or as part of another larger story. And he's also an animator, and so a lot of that connection to the stories shows up in his work in animating.
This piece is called Supernaut and the Pollinators Return to the Sky. When I made this piece, I recently started thinking about bees and the trouble with bees. And about 10 years ago, I remember people started talking about bees were disappearing and they had no idea where bees were going. And ever since then, I've always wondered about the bees and worried about them a little bit, because there are, our little buddies that are responsible for a lot of the food that we eat. And generally, I don't like to tackle any issues like head on with some force that an activist role about it, but I do like to mention it in my work through a bit of storytelling. With this piece, this is part of a series that I started and will probably continue to go through, where I'm taking bees and I'm putting them in stories that talk about where the bees are going. I think we know where the bees are going. The bees are, they're not returning home because of pesticides that are being used locally that cause them to get a neurological disorder, and they leave home and then they get confused and they don't know how to get back to their hive. But in my story, I like to think that they're a little smarter than us, and they're finding ways to go off on their own little adventures. And in this one, I've kind of taken a character who is sort of acting as their shepherd or keeper or protector, and they're all getting back on their spaceship and heading back up into the sky. I do want people to relate a little bit to the subject matter. I always try to make it a little bit inviting. There's a bit of a story that's told with every one of them, and a lot of them are playful, even if it's dark subject matter. So ultimately what I end up doing is inviting people kind of to enter my world, my lens, my perspective, and see it the way that I see it. The viewer is invited to make up their own story and their own interpretation of it at that stage. And I love hearing, how people kind of like ingest the topic. Keeping with the fashion of painting extraterrestrial scenes, I have a scene here of the moon cooking a pot of goulash, or as some people call it, hangover mac, and from it, stars are being born. My thinking in this was, I was taking a good look at some of the creation stories that come from Ojibwe culture, and there's often a theme there, there's often a bit of a message. And these stories are so playful, so vivid, they're so detailed that I'm just really inspired by them. I wanted to make something that kind of like comes from my story house. So this is a painting that has a story to it that's sort of told in the style of a creation story, but it's not an actual creation story that I've ever heard or anybody's ever heard until now. So being a bit of a writer, a bit of a storyteller in my head, I wanted to create this fun scene of moon sort of singing and cooking, and these little star characters are being born. They're kind of heading off to do what they do what stars do, just sort of illuminate various galaxies and universes, and the moon, I guess, will just keep cooking. Generally, when I get a canvas going, what I'll do is I'll put some grunge kind of textured layer of painting down, and either start real dark or real light, and then if I start light, I'll do a dark wash over it. So like I'll water down the paint with gel gloss medium, which kind of gives it like a translucent sheen, and then a ton of water, and then I'll like put the canvas down and just start moving the paint around a little bit. So it's, just kind of like the water sort of seeps into the crevices of the paint that's already there and creates its own little textures and stuff like that. And then I got a little wild on this one. I actually just splattered paint, which is not necessarily something that I do a lot, but on this one I just wanted to give it a shot, just to show movement. I always like to have a little bit of, action where the paint is boss, and then a little action where I'm kind of trying to control the paint as best I can. So this painting is called Horse Mask on Ghost. Horse Mask on Ghost is something that I was thinking about a few years ago when I was doing a residency in Santa Fe, New Mexico. New Mexico is I think it's the second oldest city in the United States, and it has a lot of history. And it's said that there are a lot of spirits in Santa Fe. So if you've ever spent any amount of time there, you might hear that you're not supposed to whistle at night in Santa Fe, because you might get, you might meet somebody that you didn't expect to meet. So in my world, a lot of times when you meet, let's say a spirit or an event in your life, or some sort of sign happens, sometimes it can be a little scary or a little frightening at first. So I created this little character here where it's a spirit sort of presenting himself to you, but he's putting it on a, he put on his horse mask because he doesn't want to scare you off before you get to hear what he has to say to you. And at the time I was studying these really elaborate horse masks that people would put over the top of their horse heads as they would like ride in ceremony or race or other events with horses. And I was really inspired by that, so I just thought it would be fun to create a horse mask for this character. Spirituality, it's a big influence on my work. The idea of spirituality and, practicing life with spiritual principles is something that sort of helped me in my career and my path in life, and all the little hurdles that I've had to come across, because I feel like it reminds me that, there are some actions that I need to take, some principles that I need to live by. And when life gets really tough, those kind of help me through it. And it reminds me that this universe, is like made up of all kinds of things that like control each other and rarely ever themselves. There are many more dimensions to this plane than we see.
For me, I've been a fan of Jonathan's work for a very long time. And For us to have him in the gallery space as an artist who is so innovative in the Minnesota art scene and the Native arts scene across the country, it was exciting to be able to sit down with him and have conversations about his work.
I think it's a really exciting time to be a part of the arts community in Grand Rapids right now. There's a lot of momentum around the role of arts in community development. There's a lot of support from the city on a governmental level and from the community as well for the arts and what arts really bring to a place. And I think there's getting to be more recognition for the importance of the arts and artists in what makes our community so special.
Thank you so much for watching. Join us again next time on Common Ground. If you have an idea for Common Ground in North Central Minnesota, email us at legacy@lptv.org or call 218-333-3014. To watch Common Ground online, visit lptv.org and click Local Shows. Episodes or segments of Common Ground, call 218-333-3020. Production funding of Common Ground was made possible in part by First National Bank BEMIDJI, continuing their second century of service to the community, a partnership for generations, member FDIC. Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money by the vote of the people November 4th, 2008. If you watch Common Ground online, consider becoming a member or making a donation at lptv.org.